Welcome back to another Autosport Q&A where we put your questions, the Autosport audience, to our esteemed panel. We'll come to those in a few moments though, but if you want to get your questions in, keep an eye out for us on YouTube, on Instagram, and I'll call out on autosport.com. So my panel this week, I'm delighted, very delighted, that's the maximum I can ever be, to have both Alex Kalinauckas and Kevin Turner here, both taking themselves away from their Christmas shopping. How are you doing, gents?
I mean, it's still a working day for us, Bryn. I don't know about you, but Christmas shopping will have to wait. There are motorsport, Formula 1 topics to discuss, and some of them very newsy, as we'll get into.
My Christmas shopping is always a disaster. I apologise in advance to my family that I let down every year. So I usually cram it into the last few days. But this is quite a big week for the editorial team, because it was the last issue after 74 years, 3 months and 3 weeks of the Autosport Weekly magazine before we go monthly in 2025 to celebrate our 75th anniversary. So yeah, quite a big week for the editorial. It was very strange sending it to press. Well, this is the day after we did that. It's out on the 19th December. It's absolutely massive as well. It's a 130-page double issue and a 60-page F1 review supplement. So we finished with a big one. But yeah, strange feeling not to have the weekly press days ahead.
I can tell by your tone that you're very excited by all these developments as well. And Christmas is on a week away now, and you're as lively as ever.
I have made a start, actually. I have made a start, but yeah, no. Well, we've been so flat chat with it, as Alex will confirm, that we haven't really had a chance to sort of look up and go, right, what's going on? It's the middle of December. Oh, right.
Well, before we get started with the Q&A, let's have some current news, and that is that Red Bull have announced that they have separated company from Sergio Perez. He leaves the team with 5 wins, 3 pole positions, and 29 podiums. Was championship runner-up as well. He departs, but who will replace him? We're yet to find out. Gents, your reaction to this news?
Well, it had been fairly well signposted from those within Red Bull over the Abu Dhabi weekend. I was there chatting to lots of people, and yeah, it had been obvious for some time that what Red Bull had wanted, they wanted things to work out. They worked very hard with Perez. This braking problem that he alluded to later on in the year, he just couldn't seem to get on top of it when it came to pushing the car at the limit. They thought it was all sort of, what can we do to keep his spirits high by giving him that new contract? Didn't work. And yeah, they sort of, in the end, it all got quite, sort of my understanding is quite exasperated, really. It's like we've tried everything here. It's not worked out. He exhausted the goodwill that he'd built up in 2021 with how he defended on Max Verstappen's behalf against Lewis Hamilton. And yeah, it ultimately just came down to Perez going, well, I've got a contract. If you want me to go, you have to effectively pay me off. And Red Bull was like, well, we'll just haggle over the price then. And that seems to have been finally what's been arrived at. And yeah, Perez goes. And I think, it's like I said, not unexpected, but overall, I think for both Red Bull and for Formula 1, probably a good thing. Obviously, though, not a good thing for Perez.
That's got to be the most drawn-out driver decision in F1 history, isn't it? I mean, we've kind of thought that this should have happened, I was going to say months, but, maybe multiple months ago. And obviously the whole contract renewal was backfired, isn't it? Because the whole idea was to try and give him the confidence to improve his performances and go, look, we're trusting you in the long term. That should give you a boost, and it hasn't happened, and now it's made it more difficult for them to come to this resolution. So I think it is good for all. I actually think it's probably good for Sergio Perez as well, actually, because he can't have enjoyed 2024, and I don't think there's any particular reason to believe that 2025 will be any better. So he needs a fresh start doing something else. So it's probably a good call for everybody, really.
And he has some money to spend at Christmas, which he didn't have prior to.
I think he probably had some money. Had a bit.
Let's get cracking straight away with the questions, and shall we? And turn our attention to the ones that the audience have put in. We'll start with Ryan on YouTube, and says, how would you rate Checo's time in F1 overall?
I like this question because it's very easy to just think of it as it's a disappointing finish. If he doesn't come back to F1, which I think he's probably likely, he should go and do something else, like you said. But actually, he was a decent Grand Prix driver. He was good in the midfield when he's driving for Sauber and Force India, Racing Point, whatever you want to call them. And he earned a chance at a top team. Okay, the McLaren thing in 2013 came a bit too early, and they went the wrong way with the car. Got it again with Red Bull, and he's kind of shown that he wasn't top draw. Well, that's fair enough. He earned his chance. He hung around a little bit too long, but a decent driver. His stats are actually quite similar to Riccardo Patrese. He's got 281 races. Patrese was 256. They both won 6 Grand Prix. Perez got more podiums. Patrese got more poles and fastest. That's quite similar, and I think they were quite similar in that they were very good without being top notch. The difference is I think Patrese probably had more days where he could step up and take on the best of his era, the Nigel Mansell, the Nelson Piquets in the same car. I honestly don't think you can really say that about Sergio Perez. If you look at his Red Bull wins, most of them were when Max Verstappen had some sort of issue. It wasn't a straight fight where he actually beat him very often. So a decent Grand Prix driver wouldn't make my top 50, might edge into the top 100. I need to go away. Perhaps that's something to do over Christmas. But, perfectly solid, but I hope he has a good post F1 career now, because it would be a shame for his overall motorsport career to finish the way it has done in 24.
Wild plans, Chris, was there. But Tracy,
nothing cooler than that sort of list, surely.
I thought you were getting cross about Max Verstappen and the champions mentality.
That's a different podcast.
That's fair enough.
I've got more things to say.
We haven't got time for that.
Patrese would have done much fewer races, though, presumably.
256 versus 281. So
okay,
similar.
Fine. Yeah, fair enough. Okay. I think with Perez, I think actually a good point to start with actually is the money. He made a fair whack from being a okay Grand Prix driver. As Kev said, he got his shot, he got his chance. I think he can look back on a career with pride. The other thing I think that's slightly disappointing for Formula One fans is that, especially with the Drive to Survive generation, they might not be aware of just how highly rated Perez was when he arrived. Like, in terms of, I don't think he was setting the world alight when it came from stepping up from GP2, but that Australian Grand Prix in 2011 when he made his debut, got disqualified, it was suddenly like, hang on a minute, this guy's turned up and he can do it, and he seems to be completely capable, and scored podiums that year for Sauber, was more closely linked with Ferrari back when he initially arrived, then obviously goes to McLaren and it all goes wrong. So yeah, a decent Grand Prix career, a fine one. I think the frustrations just grew with everybody with how bad last year went. Like, yeah, he did finish his championship runner-up, but way behind Max Verstappen. And when you've only got one team capable of winning races, the championship as a whole needs the second driver to be able to make a fight of it, as Nico Rosberg did with Lewis Hamilton all those times, 2014 to 2016. So, and Valtteri Bottas did better, but still didn't do very well when it came to the subsequent Mercedes years. So yeah, that's the sort of frustration that I think a lot of people felt about Perez. But in terms of himself, he should look back with pride on his career.
And arguably, though, Alex, it's if you have a decent second driver as your teammate, it pushes you on to be a better driver. Lewis had that with Nico. Maybe Max would be even better if you got a decent.
I think that depends on the mentality of the number one driver, doesn't it?
The champion's mentality.
Like, don't poke the bear, okay? I'm trying to stay in a good mood today, but I think it depends on. So I think some drivers are pushed on, and they get better and other drivers don't like the pressure and they want it to be their team and all about their team. I think it's pretty obvious what sort of driver Max Verstappen is. Don't think we need to go into that particularly. So he's not going to want a Lando Norris or a Lewis Hamilton or a Charles Leclerc in the second car. He just isn't. That's not going to happen. So I think where Perez is perhaps, you could say, has let Red Bull down slightly in obviously in 2021 they lost the Constructors' Championship because he got outscored by Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes. In 2023 Max Verstappen could literally have won the Constructors' Championship on his own, and then 2024 it was close again. Perez hasn't done enough, so he's kind of contributed significantly to one of their constructors' campaigns in the last 4 years, which is, Bottas did do a stronger job when he was at Mercedes, I think you'd have to say.
Yeah.
There's just a few things that I think if Perez had been closer to Verstappen, particularly last year, you'd have less of a question mark over how good Max's season was, because obviously it was great. But if the teammate is at a closer level, you're like, oh, okay, he actually was pushing to get all those wins, or was he driving within himself, things like that. It's just an interesting topic at the moment, because obviously lots of people are saying that 24 was Max's best season. We're fairly united in saying that it wasn't, for reasons that he made mistakes that he didn't say in 2021 when he was also in a very similar but actually more intense title fight against Hamilton. But Max even also himself saying, look, there were just things I was doing last year that were just better, because that, you guys might not have seen it, but he within himself sort of indicating that he feels that way. But it's interesting with Red Bull and the Constructors' Championship, because my sort of sense from speaking to people at the team is we don't really care about the lost Constructors' Championship in 2021, which, as Kev says, is down to Perez not scoring as many points. I think that there's sort of parallels with McLaren and not winning the drivers this year. It's almost like, that one for Max, obviously the controversial circumstances and everything, which we won't get into, it's sort of, that one came a bit early. They were sort of expecting to be, I think, top dog from 22. So to get the drivers in 21 was like this amazing bonus. But the fact that they didn't get both, it's sort of like, okay, that's fine. We got the one that
it broke the Mercedes run as well, didn't it?
So exactly. It started that. It's a bit like how Alonso ended the Schumacher era, and things like that. Verstappen ending the Hamilton era. So yeah, it's just interesting that they didn't seem to care about the constructors then, and now it's suddenly, oh, hang on, you've cost us you cost us another constructors championship in 23. So this is what's going on there. But also it just shows you everything's converged now and closed up, and the Red Bull era, as it stands, as we can see from that magazine down there with McLaren being constructors championship, the dominant era is over, and that's just that just shows you how things have changed from 21 to now.
4 drivers' titles and only 2 constructors' titles in that time. I'm not sure that means that Red Bull are this amazing entity if you can't seize both when you've got such an advantage 3 years in a row.
But if you're talking about just now, it just shows you how much everything closed up. I think it becomes a different issue. I think the argument is, why on earth are we changing the cars in 2026? But I don't think you can say Red Bull isn't an amazing entity, because only 2 teams until McLaren this year had won constructors titles since Brawn. I mean, it's Red Bull and Mercedes. Like, they are the best teams of this generation. There's no doubt about that.
Fair enough. Right, next question then. This is Beth on Instagram. Says, what next for Yuki Tsunoda? I thought I pronounced it correctly for you, Alex.
Well done,
for Yuki Tsunoda, if he ends up being overlooked for the Red Bull seat.
I think in this short term there'll be a fair bit of angst, because he's obviously very clear that he's ready, and that it's he doesn't understand why he keeps getting overlooked. He had this test in Abu Dhabi, understood to have gone very well. They're very impressed. As you say, at the time of recording, we don't know what the plan is in terms of the official plan of Perez's replacement, but we're fairly confident it's going to be Liam Lawson stepping up from RB. So that's the sort of short term for Tsunoda. It all comes back to the fact that the top management at Red Bull don't believe he can handle being Max Verstappen's teammate. I don't know if Lawson can handle that either, but there's enough in his short time in F1, the fact that he's willing to have a massive argument with Fernando Alonso on basically his first race back, the giving Perez the finger in Mexico. Like, this kid has got a bit about him, okay? Whether that's completely the right way of doing it or whether that's good for his long-term future, we don't know yet. But the suggestion is that Tsunoda's confidence is just too fragile. They don't dare risk putting him in the Red Bull against Verstappen. So, I think the thing that everybody overlooks in this is Honda. And there's, to my understanding, significant financial reasons why Tsunoda is still part of that program, with Red Bull running, they rebadge the Honda engines, however they do it. Honda going to Aston Martin in 2026 to effectively be the, with the works team there, with that green team. The question will then become, if Alonso decides that he's going to go fairly swiftly into the next era, would he be the person to replace Alonso? I think many more people would prefer he would be the one to replace Lance Stroll. Unlikely, because of all the situation we know with how that team operates, and with Stroll's father owning it. But yeah, I would look more towards Aston because of the financial element and Honda's support and Honda's requirements in terms of how it's presented in F1 than at Red Bull.
Yeah, I was going to agree with all that. I was going to say it will stay at RB, won't he? And then if the Honda links are strong enough, like, obviously he's not a replacement for Fernando Alonso. You're going to go out and get a bigger name than Tsunoda if you lose Alonso, but you'd like to think at some point maybe somebody at Honda is, because I don't think anyone at Aston Martin can do it, but maybe someone at Honda says, Lawrence, I think probably Lance has had enough time now. What do you reckon about sticking Tsunoda in alongside Alonso, or whoever the number one is? That could end up being Max Verstappen in 2 or 3 years' time, who knows? So I think that would make much more sense. If you're being objective about it, Tsunoda in alongside Alonso makes actually quite a lot of sense.
Would those conversations be happening right now if you're Yuki Tsunoda's management? Would you be saying, right, okay, if he's overlooked, like, as you say, we expect that's going to be, him saying, okay, our future isn't within this brand, we've got to look elsewhere?
I would assume so. I would assume they'd be having that discussion with Honda, because it's the Honda financial element and the support that's sort of keeping him around. I mean, there's various parallels with someone like Perez. Like, do we know that Tsunoda's necessarily a great? Is he just a pretty good Grand Prix driver that yet hasn't had that chance in the top team? Probably deserves a look, but there's a key reason why he's being kept out in the current camp, and no other teams are coming calling. Like, basically everyone had slots other than Ferrari, McLaren, sewed themselves up. But like, his name wasn't mentioned in terms of a Mercedes seat, was it?
No, it's not. Have Red Bull got to get it right this time, by the way, because they've had so many times they've tried people and it's not worked out over the course of the years. Have they got to get this right for Max's replacement this time, without any doubt?
Does it depend what getting it right looks like? Because if you were going for the best driver available, like we've said in previous episodes, you're on the phone to Carlos Sainz 5 minutes after the Hamilton Ferrari announcement, and that didn't happen. So they're obviously trying to, basically what they want is someone that won't upset Verstappen but will be close enough to Scott. I don't think they even need to be close enough to give Verstappen a problem. They just need him to be close enough to score some points, give them some strategy options if they're in a multi-car battle in a Grand Prix. No, because they're still Red Bull, so if they get it wrong this time, you're still going to have young drivers who want to sign up for them. So we can say, they've got to get it right this time, but they don't really, do they? If Lawson doesn't work out, they'll just try the next one along the line.
I was hoping for some controversy.
Sorry.
I know. Next question, Carlos, not Sainz on Auto... Well, maybe Carlos Sainz, I don't know. But it says not Sainz on Autosport.com asks, where is Franco Colapinto going to be heading next season?
We do know the drivers read the Autosport.com, so maybe it was. No. Williams reserve driver, I think, would be the most obvious answer, because Red Bull's interest, while that did get very intense around sort of the Brazilian Grand Prix time, notably cooled. Like, as you say, as we record this video, there's no official announcement on who Perez's replacement is going to be, but if we expect Lawson, slot RB has to be Hadjar, the F2 title contender for this year, stepping up. Colapinto, I think the chance has come and gone, basically. So therefore, Williams reserve driver next year. Unfortunately for him, both Sainz and Alex Albon already missing their appendixes, so less likely a chance that's how he'll get to step up, as Ollie Behrman did this year and Nick de Vries did at Williams a couple of years ago. But yeah, there have been more substitute appearances in recent years than I can remember in the sort of previous 10, 15 years of F1 racing. So his chance may come. Equally, other teams, there's a lot of sort of sharing around reserve drivers. So if there's I don't even know off the top of my head who Mercedes reserve driver is going to be next year with Antonelli stepping up. So if him or Russell have to miss a race, maybe that's Colapinto's. Toto Wolff picks up the phone to James Vowles, something like that. But it's not necessarily a terrible position to be in, because he's shown that other than the crashes, he's shown that he can cut it at this level. He was quicker and scored points, which Logan Sargent didn't. Okay, yeah, there were loads of crashes, but Alex Albon had a lot of crashes as well in the other cars. So let's just, there are caveats, but let's just say he can cut it at this level. He now gets to spend a year with Williams, working with them. Potentially there'll be a TCP program. That's what that's what Oscar Piastri benefited from a lot before. Well, he did it with Alpine, and they didn't benefit from putting him in that car, but it helped him when he turned up in a McLaren. So a year on the sidelines at this stage in a young driver's career, not necessarily a bad thing.
I agree with all that. That's a very good summary from Alex, but I would say I'd like to see him go and do Super Formula as well. Yeah, I know because Red Bull obviously used to put their drivers in. They're not doing that so much anymore, are they? But it's a very high level championship against some very good drivers, some proper teams. The cars are really fast, and you get to race at Suzuka. So there aren't a lot of international championships go to there before you get into Formula 1. That's why Ollie Behrman just did the Super Formula test there. So yeah, and it doesn't matter if you don't have a brilliant season, because you're up against really good drivers who are tough to beat on home ground. So if you don't go and win the championship, it's not a big disaster. So yeah, I think he should go and do Super Formula in between his reserve duties, but I suspect that's probably unlikely.
Well, as someone who used to commentate a bit on Super Formula, it is a fantastic championship. Just watching that dance around the pit stops is a thing of beauty. It is remarkable.
It's proper championship. One of motorsport's hidden gems, I think.
It certainly is. Right, Stefan on Autosport.com asks, is F1 serious about a potential race in Rwanda, or is Kyalami the venue for an African race? Alex?
Well, I finally get to use the notes that I've been clutching onto this whole time. But yes, very serious. I mean, tabled an official bid that's sort of announced, that was announced last week, with the FIA prize giving being in the capital city. They're building a track. It's being designed by Alexander Wirtz, the former F1 driver, also designing the track that's going to replace or maybe even run as a second Grand Prix in Saudi Arabia in Qiddiya. And yeah, it's got a lot of support. I would go as far as to say it's happening. Like, government officials constantly in dialogue with the F1 organisation itself, which will the FIA will have the ultimate say, but if Rwanda are willing to pay, and we've seen this throughout various elements of society, like sponsoring Arsenal, the debacle with the UK Home Office and things like that. Like, they are getting their name out there. This is their policy of how to promote their country and improve their economy. So I'm pretty sure it's going to happen for those reasons, and for the fact that F1 are working with them to make it happen. So there is that. There's sort of the only thing I would say is that obviously Vietnam got to the point of F1, if it wasn't for the pandemic, would have gone there. So it can still go wrong at the last minute. But I think the question is it Kyalami the venue for an African race? I think looking back on F1's history, that's where you would want it to be, because it's an amazing track, great races there in the past. And there was about 4 or 5 years ago, Porsche South Africa invested a lot of money in upgrading the facilities. I don't think it's grade 1 status, but it's pretty close. They had international sports car racing there with the Kyalami 9 hours, although that's not actually, in terms of the higher level sports car racing, not the World Championship, but it's not actually happened since early 2023. So yeah, that would be the one I'd probably want it to be at. But I think it's happening with Rwanda. And I think that's good for F1, because there have been races in Morocco, obviously South Africa previously, but to be properly a world championship, I think you do need to race on every continent. And by doing this, they will.
Yeah, I think having a race in Africa is definitely a good thing. Whether Rwanda is the right country, because of, I mean, you can get into debates about politics and regimes and all that sort of thing. I bet that there are plenty of countries where that's problematic. So, and from a historical point of view, you'd say, oh yeah, Kyalami, but actually there's no reason why you couldn't have a different country doing it. You could have a sustainability question. Is it not better to modify a venue that already exists rather than building yet another new racetrack for another country to have a bid to get on the F1 calendar? I think that's bigger picture stuff. But as Alex says, if you come along with a big enough pot of money, F1 will forget all that and put you on the calendar anyway. So it's almost an irrelevance us discussing which one we prefer.
If it's anything like Kadir City and Speed Park, it's going to be a phenomenal circuit as well, because that looks absolutely bonkers. Why can't you have 2 races though in Africa? Why can't you have Rwanda and do South Africa and Kyalami?
Well, who's funding it? The whole thing with the upgrades to Kyalami was that it was Porsche South Africa. I can't imagine they have the funds to hit F1's requirements for hosting fees. So it will all come down to money. I mean, it shouldn't, but it will.
And also, you're getting to the point now where surely if you start bringing more in, you have to lose some. And what do you want to lose? Like, Europe is the one that's on the chopping block all the time.
Well, they won't lose the ones that pay. They won't lose the races in the Middle East.
Exactly. And yet the motorsport history and tradition and, let's face it, spectators are in Europe. So they've got this balancing act of they want the bags of money from countries that perhaps don't have the history of the sport, but they also want to keep enough traditional venues so that it doesn't totally annoy everyone that's been following it for more than 5 minutes. So it's that balancing act. So I think probably one step at a time. Yeah, there's nothing, in theory, there's no reason why you wouldn't have 2, 3, 4 races on the African continent.
It's a pretty continent, big right?
Landmass, yeah. But I think for all the reasons we've just discussed, it's small steps, isn't it?
Well, the next question then, James on Instagram asks, was this Hamilton's worst season in F1? Go.
It was definitely his worst Mercedes season. The only thing I'd put up potentially against it would be 2011 at McLaren, when he did spend way too much of his time finding the same piece of racetrack as Felipe Massa, who was past his best at that stage, I would say. And he got completely walloped by Jenson Button in the Drivers' Championship. It was probably Jenson's best season, actually, in F1, separate podcast or video. But he did still win 3 Grand Prix. And pace-wise, he was there. I think he sort of lost his head a bit. I think he pretty much admitted that his headspace wasn't right. And he's probably worse this year. He was still 4th in our driver rankings, I think, in 2011. He isn't that high this year. So it probably is. Do you think that's fair?
I think by various metrics, yes, it is. Again, let's stick on that ratings. We ranked him 9th. That's the lowest we've ever ranked him since he joined the F1 grid in 2007. And yeah, there were also key high points, like China 2011. You ranked that race as one of Lewis's greatest ever, and he's got over 100. So the high points are better. The other season, I thought maybe you could make a case that this would be 2022, where obviously he experiences that really hard low of the Mercedes package not being as good as it was, as good as he was hoping for, as good as he was told it was going to be when it came to that zero pod design. But there were also key high points that I just think the fact they're sort of masked by the fact that by the time they were happening in Lewis's case, like Zandvoort, for example, he probably should have won that race and probably would have won it in 2024 because the field is closer. But by that point, the Red Bull just edged away. So, you just couldn't see that things were going well for him. But also the critical thing is that he beats George Russell in the qualifying head-to-head that year. This year, he's annihilated. Like, there's no way of sugarcoating it. If you look at all sessions, like the 30, including the sprint sessions, it's 24-6. And that is, I think, off the top of my head, the highest on the grid, or joint highest on the grid anyway. And also the mistakes this year, we just haven't seen of such severity in the other seasons. So I think all that combined, I'm thinking Austin, Qatar wasn't brilliant either. that's the reason why it all combines to say, yeah, it's not what you want to say about an F1 great, but it wasn't his best, and it's just it's so strange to think that this is the springboard he has going to Ferrari. Yeah, maybe he did check out. Maybe he did just go, do you know what? Mercedes have let me down by not keeping up the streak that we had with 3 successive cars. I'm just putting all my energy towards getting ready for Ferrari. It'd be understandable.
But that does force the question then, what's your gut instinct on the cause of this apparent drop in form? And is it something he can arrest going into 25 with a new venture of now being at Ferrari?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, isn't it? He's got, I mean, just going back to the 2022 comparison, I would also say that although George Russell finished ahead of Hamilton in the points, I'd say Hamilton over the balance of the season was still the better driver. He just had a few things go against him, safety car, strategy type things. Whereas this year, I would say I think Russell deservedly has beaten him in the championship, not just with the qualifying pace, but the races as well. But I think it was a combination of factors. I think it's always difficult when you're out the door. Not only do you know, but the whole team knows you're going. And I don't believe in any of the conspiracy theories. I think they've built up such a rapport and history and friendship within the team and all that. I don't think Mercedes have suddenly gone, oh, well, we're going to give him the second best stuff. I just don't think that's what's happened. But I think probably psychologically, even if it's a subconscious thing, that they probably aren't all quite pulling in the same direction. And I think Hamilton's probably at the point of his career. We always see this with great drivers. Once they're past their peak, if the car's not very good, it's very hard for them to... It's not the same as when you're a young driver going, well, I'm just going to rag it anyway. But when they get a sniff of victory, we see it with Fernando Alonso as well, and we saw it with Hamilton. I would say the peaks are still pretty high in 24. British Grand Prix, I think, is a candidate for one of his great wins. I have to review the list. But his lows were a lot lower. Can he pick himself up? Yes, because it's a fresh challenge, new mentality. He'll look. I bet you he will look younger in 2025 than he did this year.
I'm not trying to do him down on Silverstone, but I think the fact that McLaren so badly messed up with his strategy calls twice means that that's a factor in some of Lewis's high points. That, do you know what I mean? The other high points would sit above it, like Silverstone 08 or
oh, for sure, 21. Yeah.
But I think the worry, and I don't want to do Lewis down, but the worry I have about Ferrari is that this generation of cars isn't going to change. So the problem, sort of understanding the sort of suggestions coming out of his camp towards the end of the year, things that Mercedes have been saying, is that he just doesn't suit what these cars need, and particularly what the tyres need, in that he is so good on the brakes. Like, that's always been his key thing about his driving style through all his years. The tyres hate it if you just overstress them that little bit too much. And I think it's really interesting to look at Lando Norris. He spoke to me in Spain about how what you want to do as a racing driver is on the final qualifying lap, you brake even later and even harder, and that's where you find the lap time. The tyres hate that. The cars don't respond well to it, so you have to row back a little bit, and it's going against their nature so much. But what I find fascinating is that Charles Leclerc, F1's fastest qualifier, seems to be able to cope with all this and to keep the peak of the tyre. It means that's why he's so wild, because he ends up on the edge so much. But I don't see how Lewis can suddenly, over the winter, become a master at that. He'll still be brilliant in the races, but he's just because we have no other evidence to go on, he starts off in the same position at Ferrari as he ended Mercedes, behind in qualifying, brilliant in the races, but maybe there's just too much to overcome, especially if there's a complete multi-team scrap for victory. It'd be fantastic even if that is the case, he overcomes it, but that's my sort of worry about next year for him.
Whatever happens, it's going to be really interesting to see how he adapts and whether or not we see a younger, fresher Lewis Hamilton or a older, greyer Lewis Hamilton.
It's like the lead story going into this. Whichever way it goes, Leclerc and Hamilton at Ferrari, it's great, isn't it?
And also he may well use this as motivation, as fuel. Like we know that people in F1 do it all the time. Comments Otmar Zafnauer made when he was towards the end of his time at Alpine, referencing Autosport YouTube videos. But even like McLaren, like they're still going on. Like, so McLaren at the start of 23 briefed the media that they were bad, the car was bad. So everybody wrote, oh, McLaren looked bad. And they go, the media are saying we're bad. Let's use this as fuel to be brilliant. Maybe that'll happen with Lewis next year. You never know.
Everyone needs a rocket, don't they, from time to time? Right, Rowan on Instagram asks, how do you think Carlos Sainz will get on at Williams in 2025?
Yeah, very well, I think. It is very interesting speaking to Alex Albon in an interview at the end of last year. He already referenced Carlos Sainz as a team leader. Now, I don't think he specifically meant that, but it just shows you that that's sort of already, that's in his brain already because of Sainz's experience, because he's a race winner. but that gives me a little insight into what might happen next year, and I predicting that Sainz will come out on top quite comprehensively in that because of how good he was against Charles Leclerc. And Leclerc had a brilliant season in 2024, and Sainz was very close to him for so much of that and fought him absolutely savagely. I don't see how Albon wins that same fight. So therefore, good season for Sainz. He's also very clever, very good communicator. That's exactly what Williams needs as well. So he definitely made the right call in choosing Williams over Sauber. And in terms of just looking at everything in isolation, it should work out well for him next year.
Yeah, I think it's a great signing for Williams, isn't it? Absolutely a coup for them, for where they are in the constructors table to get hold of Sainz. You know, he's compared well. He's been teammates with Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, and Charles Leclerc, and he's looked okay. So he's been a fraction off Leclerc at Ferrari, but he's 95% to being a number one driver at a leading team, and he's got all the experience of winning races. As Alex says, he's a smart customer. I think it's a great test for Albon. We'll find out how far Albon really has moved on since he left Red Bull, because obviously he struggled a little bit against Verstappen, but I think that environment was always going to be a tricky one to come into. This is his team. Sainz is coming in. How long will it be Albon's team, possibly? So I think if Williams can be moving up the grid, get a few more points on the board, maybe get a place or two higher in the Constructors' Championship, I think you'd say at the end of 25, then Sainz is heading in the right direction.
There was, just very quickly, he meant it as a joke, but there was a really interesting little moment from Lando Norris in the press conference in Abu Dhabi. Obviously, those two fought for the win there. The Constructors' Championship was on the line. And basically, Norris went, well, I'm happy he's not going to be in a fast car next year because it removes someone that all the top guys know, hang on a minute, we're not sure we can necessarily beat him every time, especially on his day. Like that day in Mexico, superb. Australia, superb. That tells me a lot of how highly they rate Sainz. And obviously with Hamilton coming across, Antonelli coming in, they don't know how good he's going to be. So from the people that really, really, really know, Sainz not being in a top car is good for them.
But really, success, how well will he do? You're saying essentially, Kev, that if they can move Williams up one or two in the constructors, that is a success as far as any metric can.
Yeah, or
can be
closer on raw pace to the front. Well,
Right.
it'd be ridiculous to say, Sainz is going to go in there and finish on the podium or win, take Williams' first Grand Prix victory since 2012. But I think so long as they've got progress, it's definitely a step up. Vowles seems to know what he's doing. It's got quite a good vibe about it at the moment.
There's a chance that he goes there and already looks a hero. And it will benefit Albon as well, because speaking to Albon and Vowles and Dave Robson, the head of engineering effectively there, what they're getting at is that the weight problems they had at the start of the year, they're confident at this stage that they won't repeat that. And that is just free lap time. Like Williams effectively saying, we were the fifth fastest car if you look at our aerodynamic design, but the weight held us back. So therefore, if they can start 25 without that and be right in there, they could even be beating Aston Martin, and that would be a hell of a coup. And when you've got someone like Sainz in there, you know he's going to grab the top result from it.
Right. God, weight holds us all back, doesn't it? Especially leading to Christmas. God,
Let's
I've already,
talk about it
immediately
now.
after Christmas is round.
I've already got the gym membership reactivated. Right, okay. Matty, apart from you, Alex, of course, yes. Matty on YouTube asks, who had the better season in your eyes, Charles Leclerc or Lando Norris?
I think we just slightly disagree, because I had to overrule you and Colin J. Box all leg.
I don't think it was overall, but it was quite a discussion, wasn't it? Well, basically, we couldn't decide. So this is for the Autosport Top 50.
Yeah.
And top 10, F1 top 10.
And F1 Top 10, yeah. And we had quite a long debate because it's quite nip and tuck, I think. And in the end, it was, okay, Alex, can you go away and look at the number of errors that they made across the season? And you discovered...
Yeah, I spent my day off in Qatar going through this. Lovely bit of relaxation. But anyway, it was between Qatar and Abu Dhabi. But it's quite considerable, actually, when you add up the errors that both Norris and Leclerc made. And you can slice it a few ways. There's a few elements where, like say, take for example Norris in sprint qualifying in Miami, because obviously he's got the updated McLaren. It looks amazing. Then he goes to soft tyres and he just massively overheats them. He's on the radio going like, well, I did what you told me and it screwed me over. So was that his mistake? Was that team's mistake? So a little bit of a pinch of salt with all of this, let's not forget. But if you add everything up, Norris comes out with 22 errors, Leclerc's on 12, I think, or pretty much that. That's quite a lot. That's quite a big difference. Whether these are small errors, whether these are big errors. So like Lando Norris going slightly too long on his marks at Silverstone, much smaller error than missing the yellow flags in Qatar. Leclerc did make mistakes as well. Let's not forgetting that the whole Austria weekend was pretty messy. But the other thing that really settled it was their wheel-to-wheel racing. Like, took Norris a long time to race Max Verstappen as hard as is required. Leclerc did that pretty consistently. And in the Brazil race, the famous Brazil race, the one that's down there on that magazine front cover, he was the only driver to offer Verstappen any sort of fight, and he did it in the sprint race the day before in the dry. And it's that sort of thing. There were some amazing passes, a pass around the outside of George Russell into turn 1 in China. I think a lot of people have forgotten about that. Like, that's the thing that really made the difference. And yet, overall, as we've already talked about with Carlos Sainz, to have a teammate that's so close to your level and to come out on top, yeah, he got beaten a few times, but Sainz pushed Leclerc harder than Piastri pushed Norris, and the same thing happened. Yeah, Piastri was closer on a few occasions, but yeah, it all combined again into Leclerc, number 2, better season. Great seasons for both, but just ever so slightly, he comes out on top.
I think also you have to remember Leclerc's a little bit further along the road as being used to being a front runner, and he has raced Verstappen more often at the front of the Grand Prix. Yep. He is more used to controlling things, well, maybe not controlling things, but running at the front of Formula One. And Lando Norris has gone from not having a Grand Prix victory to his name to we're talking about him as a title challenger in a few months. And there's a lot to take on board and a lot of little fine-tuning that you need to do. I think that his performance in Abu Dhabi has shown that he's got there. He now knows how to control the Grand Prix from the front. Leclerc was already there, given the opportunity. He just nailed it. He never looked like losing Monaco. He snuck Monza out from underneath McLaren's nose. Austin, obviously, they were dominant anyway, the Ferraris. So, yeah, he looked a little bit more... When Leclerc isn't ragging it and handing it out and almost having an accident, I think he's actually quite a cool, controlled customer now.
Well, so there are two things that cancel each other out in my eyes. One, that, Leclerc never had the pressure of being the title rival to Max Verstappen. He didn't have the constant questions, which I think annoyed Norris no end. And, it does have an impact and things like that. At the same time, Norris never had to deal with his team making his car worse, which Ferrari did. And without doing that, potentially Leclerc is the title contender as well, alongside Norris. And almost certainly, I think, Ferrari win the Constructors because of how much better they started the year compared to McLaren.
Yeah, and you mentioned his teammates as well. I mean, Leclerc has had Sainz as a teammate further along the road as well, his development of Piastri, so they're working together, so he's done even better against a arguably stronger teammate because of experience. Perhaps you factor that in as well?
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Although, I mean, Piastri's peaks are high. We've seen enough to know that he's the real deal and he's proper as well. And ultimately, his peak might be higher than Sainz's. When we, in 10, 15, 20 years' time, when we're rating the drivers, it wouldn't surprise me if Piastri is nipped ahead of Sainz and is a world champion or whatever.
It wouldn't surprise me to see him as world champion next year.
Well,
that's the rate, that's the level we're talking, I think. Like, especially his rate of improvement, and he knows the one area he needs to fix is qualifying. Whether he can do that because it's inherent how fast the driver is or how close they can get to the maximum of a certain car package, but I'm really impressed by him. And you speak to engineers at the lower level at Prema. I spoke to their technical director recently for an upcoming thing we're doing about Lewis Hamilton and Fred Vasseur. But also, he worked with Charles Leclerc at Prema. He worked with Oscar Piastri. And the feeling there is this Piastri guy is the real deal.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear, isn't it? But he had, as a snapshot, like you're saying, in 2024, I think Sainz was probably a more consistent performer than Piastri because he had some weekends where he was just AWOL.
Yeah.
Sounds like the soundbite for this podcast is just there. If you want to find out who Alex is talking about, make sure you listen to the full episode. There you go. Last question. Perfect.
What a pro.
What a pro. Final question. Rizwan on Instagram asks, do the new FIA renders for the 2026 car tell us anything new, Alex?
To my notes, flaps.
Flaps.
Yes,
there you go.
That's effective.
There we go.
The end.
Thanks very much for tuning in.
Technical analysis.
Yes, it does ultimately though come down to flaps. They're the only thing that's actually been added to the renders that we can see. The dimensions of the regs, things have ever so slightly changed, but it hasn't moved things along from what was announced at Austin, that basically downforce has been added to the cars in terms of what's allowed within the rules. But if you do look at the renders, like I said, on the front wing, there are you can see the aero parts that are going to be active for when the cars, and I can't remember if they've done away with the X mode or Z mode or whatever it was that they came up for the ridiculous reason that the engines aren't powerful enough. But yeah, when they're in, as my colleague Jake Botts-Lake informs me, this is very much layman's terms, horizontal for going down the straights, vertical in the corners. That's how they're going to be adjusting by themselves. And yeah, like I said, other than that, the rules have changed ever so slightly, but you wouldn't have been able to see that in the renders.
My concern is that it looks like there's more downforce and more flicks, and like look at the rear wing as well. It looks a bit more complicated than it did originally, and obviously it's to make the cars faster. And almost universally in motorsport history, when you make the cars faster, the racing gets worse. So they need to, and also these are just renders that the FIA are coming up with. Give it to an Adrian Newey and look at all the extra bits and bobs that suddenly appear on the car. So yeah, they need to be a bit. I think you don't want to get too carried away going, oh, the cars are going to be too slow, we need to make them quicker, because the designers will automatically make them quicker virtually every time. Like the history of Formula 1 since the 1970s has been pegging people back with the rules, and then the clever people just going faster again. So I think, make it a bit difficult for them. Don't give them too flicks and flaps and widgets and things to be working with, because they'll ruin it all.
There you go. End of. Look, gents, thank you very much indeed. And thank you, of course, for watching. Don't forget, you can get your questions in to us on YouTube, Instagram, and our call out as well on autosport.com. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date with all of our coverage. From all the team here, we wish you a very, very Merry Christmas, don't we?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Of course.
You might.
I thought you might after the start of this whole podcast.
I'm fine. I don't know what I've done wrong.
You've got the champions mentality.
Thank you very much, gents. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. As always, we'll see you next time.